The conference room was bathed in candlelight, wine glasses glinting on the mahogany table. Elena Rodriguez stood frozen in the doorway, her 7-month pregnant belly pressing against her ribs as she watched her billionaire husband Alexander passionately kissing his young marketing executive. Jessica. But it wasn't the betrayal that would destroy Alexander Chen's empire. It was what Elena found on his phone. Hundreds of text messages, plans for murder, stolen millions, and the most chilling words she'd ever read. Once the baby is born, we'll make it look like suicide. Elena won't be a problem much longer. They thought they'd deleted everything. They thought the pregnant wife was just a helpless victim. They were dead wrong. Elena Rodriguez was about to become the most dangerous woman in Manhattan. You're about to witness the most shocking revenge story ever caught on record. Smash that like button if you're ready for justice. Subscribe for more incredible true stories. And buckle up because Elena's about to detonate Alexander's entire world. The gleaming towers of Manhattan stretched endlessly into the gray November sky, their glass facades reflecting the ambitions and dreams of millions. Among them, the Tech Vision Corp building stood like a monument to modern success, 50 floors of steel, glass, and unbridled power. On the 45th floor, in a penthouse that cost more than most people would earn in a lifetime, Elena Rodriguez was preparing what she thought would be a perfect evening for her husband. The marble kitchen countertops gleamed under the soft LED lighting as Elena carefully arranged Alexander's favorite sandwich, prosciutto, and aged brie on artisanal sourdough. Her 7-month pregnant belly made even simple tasks challenging, but she persevered with the dedication that had defined their 5-year marriage. The baby kicked, and Elena smiled, placing her free hand on her stomach. "Soon, little one," she whispered, "Daddy will be so excited to meet you." Their penthouse was a testament to Alexander's meteoric rise in the tech world. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered breathtaking views of Central Park, while Italian leather furniture and priceless artwork created an atmosphere of refined luxury. The nursery, a masterpiece of soft pastels and handcrafted furniture, waited patiently for its future occupant. Elena had sacrificed her own architectural career to support Alexander's vision. She'd been there through the sleepless nights, the failed pitches, the moments when bankruptcy seemed inevitable. Now, at 35, Alexander Chen was the CEO of a company worth $500 million, and Elena was about to become the mother of his heir. But success had changed him. The warm, passionate man she'd married had gradually become distant, cold, consumed by power and ambition. Their conversations had dwindled to logistics board meetings, charity galas, social obligations. Still, Elena held on to hope that their child would rekindle the love they'd once shared. She glanced at her Cartier watch, an anniversary gift from happier times. 30 p.m. Alexander was working late again, the 4th time this week. The sandwich sat wrapped in the refrigerator, growing cold like their relationship. On impulse, Elena decided to surprise him. She'd bring dinner to his office, just like she used to during their early dating days. Wrapping the sandwich carefully and grabbing a bottle of his favorite wine, she made her way to the private elevator that connected their penthouse to the corporate floors below. The elevator hummed quietly as it descended to the 50th floor, the executive level. These halls were familiar to Elena. She'd designed the layout herself 3 years ago. The modern minimalist aesthetic, the strategic placement of artwork, the flow of natural light, all her vision, executed to perfection. But as the elevator doors opened, something felt different. The usual bustle of late-night workers was absent. The floor seemed eerily quiet, illuminated only by the emergency lighting and the glow from Alexander's corner office. Elena's heels clicked softly against the polished concrete floors as she made her way down the hallway. Then she heard it. Laughter. Soft. Intimate. Unmistakably feminine. Elena's heart began to race. She recognized that laugh. Jessica Morgan, the 26-year-old vice president of marketing whom Alexander had hired 6 months ago. Elena had always felt uncomfortable around Jessica, though she couldn't quite articulate why. Perhaps it was the way Jessica's eyes lingered on Alexander during meetings, or how she always found excuses to stay late when Elena visited the office. The laughter was coming from the private conference room adjacent to Alexander's office. Elena approached quietly, her pregnancy making stealth difficult. Through the slightly open door, she could see the warm glow of candles in a corporate conference room at 8:30 p.m. Her breath caught in her throat. There, on the Italian leather sofa she had personally selected, Alexander and Jessica were locked in a passionate embrace. Jessica's manicured hands tangled in Alexander's hair, while he whispered something in her ear that made her giggle. Wine glasses sat on the coffee table, along with takeout containers from Nobu, their special restaurant, the place where Alexander had proposed to Elena 5 years ago. Elena felt the world tilt beneath her feet. The sandwich slipped from her numb fingers, hitting the floor with a soft thud. Her pregnant belly seemed to press against her lungs, making breathing impossible. But it was what happened next that truly shattered her world. Alexander's phone, lying carelessly on the conference table, lit up with a notification, then another, and another. The constant buzzing of incoming messages was impossible to ignore. Yet the couple remained oblivious, lost in their betrayal. Elena's architectural training had taught her to notice details, and she noticed everything. The way Jessica's dress, a red number Elena recognized from Saks, was draped over a chair. The way Alexander's wedding ring sat abandoned on the table next to the wine. The way they moved together with the familiarity of lovers, not the awkwardness of a first encounter. This wasn't new. This had been going on for a while. Moving with trembling hands, Elena approached the table where Alexander's phone continued its electronic symphony of notifications. Her heart hammered so loudly she was certain they would hear it, but the couple remained absorbed in each other. The phone's lock screen showed dozens of unread messages from Jessica. Elena knew the passcode. It had always been her birthday, December 5th, 12:05. With shaking fingers, she entered the numbers, praying he hadn't changed it. The phone unlocked. What Elena saw in the following moments would be burned into her memory forever. Hundreds of messages stretched back 8 months, exactly when Elena had announced her pregnancy. The thread told a story more horrific than mere infidelity. Jessica, I can't wait for this weekend at the Hamptons house. Just you and me. Alexander. I've been thinking about leaving Elena. This pregnancy complicates things, but maybe it's a blessing in disguise. Jessica. What do you mean, Alexander? Once the baby is born, I'll have grounds for custody. Elena's been so emotional lately, I could claim postpartum depression, have her declared unfit. Elena's hands shook so violently, she nearly dropped the phone. She scrolled back further, each message a dagger to her heart. Jessica, I saw Elena at the doctor's office today. She looked so happy about the baby. If only she knew Alexander. She's useful for now. The pregnancy gives me good PR, the family man's CEO. But once it's over, Jessica, you said she was just a breeding mare. I can't wait until she's gone. The messages became more explicit, more cruel. Photos Jessica had sent, plans for romantic getaways funded by company money, discussions about Elena's accidents that could happen after the birth. But it was the most recent exchange that made Elena's blood turn to ice. Alexander, Elena's been suspicious lately. She asked too many questions about my schedule. Jessica, maybe it's time to accelerate our timeline. I know people who could arrange an accident during delivery. Complications happen all the time. Alexander, let me think about it. But you're right, she can't get in our way much longer. Elena clutched her pregnant belly, feeling the baby kick as if sensing her distress. They weren't just planning to leave her. They were planning to kill her. The phone slipped from her nerveless fingers, clattering onto the marble floor. The sound echoed through the conference room like a gunshot. Alexander and Jessica sprang apart, their faces transforming from passion to shock to rage in seconds. Elena! Alexander's voice was sharp, angry, not embarrassed or apologetic, but furious at being caught. What the hell are you doing here? Jessica smoothly reached for her dress, slipping it on with practiced ease. Her expression showed no shame, only mild annoyance, like someone interrupted during a minor inconvenience. I, I brought you dinner, Elena whispered, her voice barely audible. By sneaking around and going through my phone. Alexander stood, not bothering to button his shirt. This is exactly the kind of paranoid behavior I was talking about. Elena, the pregnancy has made you irrational. Elena stared at him in disbelief. Even caught red-handed, he was turning this around on her. I saw the messages, she said, her voice growing stronger. I know everything. The money you've been stealing from the company, the plans you've made, the threats. Threats. Alexander laughed, but there was no humor in it. Elena, you're clearly having some kind of breakdown. Jessica was here for a late meeting about the Morrison account. We ordered dinner. And yes, we had some wine to celebrate closing the deal. If your paranoid mind interpreted innocent business interactions as something else, that's your problem. Jessica stepped forward, her expression sympathetic but cold. Elena, honey, I think the stress of pregnancy might be affecting your judgment. Alexander loves you so much he's constantly worried about your emotional state. Elena felt like she was drowning. These two people, caught in the most compromising situation possible, with damning evidence on Alexander's phone, were calmly gaslighting her into believing she was insane. I read the messages, Elena repeated, her voice stronger now. I have proof. Alexander's expression darkened. In 2 quick steps, he reached the phone and snatched it up, his fingers flying over the screen. Proof of what? He said, showing her the device. There's nothing here but work communications. Elena grabbed the phone, frantically scrolling through the messages. They were gone. All of them. The entire thread with Jessica had vanished, replaced by innocuous work-related texts about meetings and presentations. That's impossible, Elena breathed. They were here. Hundreds of messages about killing me, about the money. Elena. Alexander's voice was patient, condescending, the tone one might use with a confused child. There's nothing there because there was nothing there. You're having pregnancy-induced paranoia. It's more common than you think. Jessica nodded sympathetically. My sister went through the same thing with her second pregnancy. The hormones can make you see threats that aren't there. Elena looked between them, seeing their calm, concerned expressions, and for a moment, doubt crept in. Could she have imagined it all? The messages had seemed so real, so detailed, but the phone showed nothing now. Then she remembered the automatic cloud backup on Alexander's phone. Everything was stored on the company servers. The messages might be deleted from the device, but they would still exist in the backup files. I need to go, Elena said quietly. Elena, wait. Alexander reached for her arm, his touch gentle but firm. You're clearly upset. Let me drive you home. We need to talk about getting you some help. Elena jerked away from him. Don't touch me. The mask slipped for just a moment, and Elena saw something cold and calculating in Alexander's eyes before the concerned husband expression returned. I'm worried about you, he said, and I'm worried about our baby. This kind of stress isn't good for either of you. Elena backed toward the door, her hand protectively covering her belly. I said don't touch me. She turned and walked as quickly as her pregnant body would allow toward the elevator. Behind her, she could hear Alexander and Jessica whispering urgently, but she couldn't make out the words. As the elevator doors closed, Elena caught one last glimpse of them. They weren't looking concerned or confused anymore. They were looking angry and scared. The ride back to the penthouse felt eternal. Elena's mind raced, trying to process what she'd witnessed, what she'd read, what she now knew about the man she'd loved and trusted completely. Once safely behind the locked door of their home, Elena went straight to her laptop. If the messages were backed up on the company servers, she needed to access them before Alexander had a chance to delete them there too. She logged into the corporate system using her administrative access privileges Alexander had given her years ago when she was helping design the office space. Most wives of CEOs didn't have high-level access to company servers. But Elena had needed it for the renovation project, and Alexander had never revoked it. Her fingers flew over the keyboard as she navigated to the backup files. There, in the message archives, was everything she'd read on Alexander's phone. Every cruel word, every threat, every detail of their betrayal and their plans. Elena methodically began copying the files to an encrypted drive, her architectural mind organizing the evidence systematically. Messages were categorized by date and content: financial fraud, personal threats, evidence of the affair, plans for her murder. By 3 a.m., she had everything. Hundreds of messages, photos, even voice recordings that Jessica had sent to Alexander, recordings where she explicitly discussed removing Elena permanently and making it look like a complication. Elena sat back in her chair, exhausted but grimly satisfied. She had proof, undeniable, comprehensive proof. Now she just had to stay alive long enough to use it. Dawn broke gray and cold over Manhattan, but Elena had been awake for hours. She sat at her kitchen counter, the encrypted drive containing the evidence hidden in a safe deposit box across town, a backup copy stored with her lawyer, and another uploaded to a secure cloud service. She had learned from Alexander's mistake redundancy was everything. The front door opened at 6 a.m., right on schedule. Alexander always arrived home at exactly 6 a.m. after his morning gym session, a routine as precise as clockwork. Elena heard his footsteps in the foyer, the soft thud of his gym bag hitting the marble floor. Elena. His voice was carefully modulated, concerned but not guilty. "Honey, are you awake?" She took a deep breath, steeling herself for what was to come. In the kitchen, Alexander appeared in the doorway, freshly showered and wearing his usual Tom Ford suit. To anyone else, he would have looked like the perfect husband: handsome, successful, attentive. Elena now saw him for what he truly was: a predator in expensive clothing. "We need to talk about last night," he said, pouring himself coffee from the machine. His movements were casual, relaxed. "I'm worried about you." "Are you?" Elena's voice was steady. She'd spent the early morning hours rehearsing this conversation, knowing that her life and her baby's life depended on playing it perfectly. Alexander sat across from her, reaching for her hands. Elena forced herself not to recoil from his touch. "Elena, what you thought you saw last night, it wasn't what it seemed. I know pregnancy can make things feel overwhelming, but these paranoid thoughts aren't healthy. I saw you with Jessica. You saw me having a business dinner with a colleague. That's all." His eyes were earnest, convincing. Elena marveled at how easily he lied. "Jessica is a valuable employee. Nothing more. The fact that your mind immediately jumped to infidelity tells me we need to get you some professional help." Elena felt the familiar doubt creeping in. He sounded so sincere, so reasonable. But then she remembered the messages, his cold laughter as he called her a breeding mare. "I want to see your phone," she said quietly. Alexander's expression didn't change, but Elena caught the slight tightening around his eyes. "Of course," he said, pulling out his device and unlocking it. "Look at whatever you want. You'll see there's nothing inappropriate here." Elena scrolled through the messages with Jessica. They were exactly as he'd said: professional, businesslike, focused on the Morrison account. No trace remained of the hundreds of intimate and threatening messages she'd read the night before. Satisfied, Alexander asked gently. Elena handed back the phone. "I suppose I might have misunderstood." Alexander smiled, the expression warm and relieved. "Pregnancy hormones can be brutal. Why don't I set up an appointment with Dr. Matthews? She specializes in prenatal mental health." "That might be good," Elena agreed, playing her part perfectly. Alexander kissed her forehead, and Elena forced herself to remain still under his touch. "I love you," he said. "Both of you. Everything I do is for our family." If only you knew, Elena thought, how true that statement is about to become. After Alexander left for work, Elena began phase 2 of her plan. She called Marcus Williams, a brilliant lawyer she'd known since college. Marcus specialized in corporate fraud and had a reputation for taking down powerful men who thought themselves untouchable. Elena Rodriguez, Marcus said warmly when he answered. It's been years. How are you? I need help, Elena said without preamble. And I need complete confidentiality? Marcus's tone immediately shifted to professional concern. What's going on? Elena spent the next hour laying out everything: the affair, the threats, the financial fraud, the murder plans. Marcus listened without interruption, occasionally asking for clarification or requesting specific details. Do you have the evidence secured? He asked when she finished. Multiple copies, multiple locations. Good, Elena, this is serious. If what you're telling me is accurate, you're in immediate physical danger. We need to move fast. What do you recommend? First, we document everything with law enforcement. The SEC will want to know about the financial crimes, and the FBI will be very interested in the conspiracy to commit murder. Second, we get you somewhere safe. If Alexander suspects you have evidence, he might accelerate his timeline. Elena touched her belly, feeling the baby kick restlessly. How long do we have, based on what you've told me about their conversations? Probably not long. Can you meet me this afternoon? I know a safe house where you can stay while we build the case. I'll be there. Elena spent the morning preparing. She packed a small bag with essentials, withdrew cash from a personal account Alexander didn't know about, and made copies of important documents. Most crucially, she set up a digital dead man switch if she didn't check in every 12 hours. The evidence would automatically be sent to the FBI, SEC, and major news outlets. At 2 p.m., she was supposed to meet Marcus at his office in Midtown. She never made it. As Elena walked through the parking garage of their building, heading for her car, two men in dark suits approached from behind a concrete pillar. Mrs. Chen. The taller one had a slight accent. Russian, maybe Eastern European. Your husband would like to speak with you. Elena's blood turned to ice. I don't know who you are, but I'm not going anywhere with you. The shorter man stepped closer, and Elena saw the bulge of a weapon under his jacket. It wasn't a request, he said softly. Elena's hand flew to her belly. I'm pregnant. You can't. We have instructions to be careful with the baby, the tall man said. Your husband was very specific about that. They escorted Elena to a black SUV with tinted windows. As they drove through the streets of Manhattan, Elena frantically tried to think of an escape plan. But with armed men on either side of her and her mobility limited by pregnancy, options were limited. The SUV pulled into the underground garage of a nondescript office building in Queens. Elena was led to a freight elevator that rose to the 15th floor, then down a hallway to a conference room with no windows. Alexander was waiting for her. He sat at the head of a polished conference table, still wearing his expensive suit, looking every inch the successful CEO. But his eyes were cold, predatory, nothing like the concerned husband who had kissed her goodbye that morning. Hello, Elena. Alexander. Elena forced her voice to remain steady. Interesting way to invite your wife to lunch. He smiled, but there was no warmth in it. I know about your meeting with Marcus Williams. I know about the evidence you think you have. I know about your little insurance policies. Elena's heart sank. How had he found out so quickly? Corporate IT tracks all access to company servers. Alexander continued, as if reading her thoughts. Including after-hours access by administrative accounts. Did you really think I wouldn't notice you downloading terabytes of data at 3 a.m.? Elena remained silent, calculating. If he knew about the evidence, why was she still alive? The thing is, Alexander continued, I've had time to think about our situation, and I've realized that you might actually be useful to me alive. How generous of you, Alexander chuckled. You always did have spirit. It's one of the things I first loved about you. His expression hardened. But spirit without intelligence is just stupidity. Do you want to know what's going to happen now? Elena said nothing, but her hand protectively covered her belly. You're going to suffer a tragic mental breakdown, Alexander explained conversationally. The stress of pregnancy, combined with paranoid delusions about your loving husband, will require immediate psychiatric intervention. You'll be committed to a private facility, very discreet, very secure. After the baby is born, your condition will deteriorate. Sadly, you'll take your own life, unable to cope with postpartum depression. And you get everything, Elena said quietly. The baby, the inheritance from my parents, the clean reputation. Exactly. With a properly documented history of mental illness, no one will question the timeline. Jessica will be wonderfully supportive during my time of grief. We'll marry in about 18 months, respectfully waiting after your tragic death. Elena felt something cold and sharp crystallize in her chest. This man had once been her husband, her partner, the father of her child. Now he was calmly describing her murder as if discussing a business merger. There's just one problem with your plan, Elena said. Oh, what's that? Elena smiled, and for the first time since this nightmare began, it was genuine. You're assuming I came here unprepared. Alexander's confident expression flickered slightly. As I said, Elena continued, I know you track server access. I knew you'd discover the downloads. I even knew you'd have me followed when I tried to meet Marcus. Then you walked right into a trap. No, Elena said, pulling out her phone. I laid one. She held up the device, showing a recording app that had been running since she entered the building. Every word you've said in the last 10 minutes has been recorded and automatically uploaded to a secure server. Your confession to planned murder, your description of the kidnapping, your threats against me and our child, all of it documented and distributed to multiple recipients. Alexander's face went white. You're bluffing. Am I? Elena stood, her movements calm and deliberate despite her pregnancy. Marcus Williams received the recording 5 minutes ago. So did Agent Sarah Chen at the FBI. She's very interested in cases involving threats against pregnant women. The SEC has the financial evidence, and the media outlets will have everything within the hour? That's impossible. We took your phone when you got in the car. Elena smiled wider. You took a phone, not necessarily my phone. I may be pregnant, Alexander, but I'm not stupid. I've been recording every conversation since last night, using equipment you've never seen. The conference room door burst open. FBI agents flooded in, weapons drawn, shouting commands for everyone to get on the ground. Elena Rodriguez, a tall woman with graying hair, approached, her badge clearly visible. Agent Sarah Chen, are you injured? I'm fine, Elena said, though her hands were shaking with adrenaline. The baby's fine too. Agent Chen nodded to her team, who were already cuffing Alexander and his associates. Mr. Alexander Chen, Agent Chen announced formally, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, racketeering, fraud, and kidnapping. You have the right to remain silent. As the agent continued reading Miranda rights, Elena watched her husband's face transform from shock to rage to desperate calculation. Even now, she could see him thinking, planning, looking for an angle to escape consequences. This isn't over, Alexander hissed as the agents led him toward the door. You have no idea what you've started. Elena met his eyes steadily. Yes, I do. I've started the end of your story and the beginning of mine. 3 months later, Elena stood in the marble lobby of the federal courthouse in Lower Manhattan, her newborn daughter Isabella sleeping peacefully in her arms. The media circus outside was intense: cameras, reporters, protesters, both supporting and condemning her. But inside the courthouse, Elena felt a strange sense of calm. Today was Judgment Day. The courtroom was packed beyond capacity. Elena recognized faces from the financial world, tech industry executives, women's rights advocates, and curiosity seekers drawn by the sensational nature of the case. The prosecution had built an airtight case using Elena's evidence, and additional investigations had uncovered a web of corruption that reached far beyond Alexander's initial crimes. Jessica Morgan sat at the defendant's table next to Alexander, her designer clothes and professional makeup unable to hide the strain of the past 3 months. Her own lawyer had tried to negotiate a plea deal, but the prosecution had refused. The evidence was too strong, the crimes too serious. Elena took her seat in the front row, Isabella cradled against her chest. Marcus Williams sat beside her, reviewing his notes for his upcoming testimony. As her civil attorney, he would present the case for damages once the criminal proceedings concluded. All rise for the Honorable Judge Patricia Morrison. Judge Morrison was a stern woman in her 60s, known for her no-nonsense approach to white-collar crime. She had reviewed all the evidence in chambers and seemed unimpressed by the defense's attempts to claim that Elena had manipulated or fabricated the recordings. Mr. Chen, Judge Morrison addressed Alexander directly, you have pled not guilty to all charges. However, the evidence presented by the prosecution appears to be overwhelming. Do you wish to change your plea at this time? Alexander's defense attorney, an expensive criminal lawyer named David Rothstein, whispered urgently in his client's ear. Alexander shook his head firmly. No, Your Honor. My client maintains his innocence. Judge Morrison's expression suggested she found this position less than credible, but she nodded professionally. Very well. Mr. Prosecutor, please present your case. Assistant District Attorney James Morrison. No relation to the judge, stood and approached the jury. He was a career prosecutor who specialized in complex financial crimes, and he had spent months preparing for this moment. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, he began, over the next several days, you will hear a story that seems almost too evil to believe. You will hear recorded conversations in which a husband and father plans the murder of his pregnant wife. You will see financial records documenting the theft of millions of dollars from company shareholders. You will witness evidence of a conspiracy so callous, so calculating, that it challenges our basic understanding of human decency. Elena watched the jurors' faces as the prosecutor spoke. Several looked shocked already, and he hadn't even presented the evidence yet. The defendant, Alexander Chen, is not the successful businessman he pretends to be. He is a criminal who used his position of trust to steal, to threaten, and ultimately to plan murder. The evidence will show beyond any reasonable doubt that Mr. Chen conspired with his co-defendant, Jessica Morgan, to kill his wife Elena Rodriguez Chen after she gave birth to their child. The prosecutor gestured toward Elena. Mrs. Chen is here today, alive and well, only because of her own intelligence and courage. She uncovered this plot, documented it thoroughly, and worked with law enforcement to protect not only herself, but the shareholders and employees who were being victimized by Mr. Chen's criminal enterprise. Elena held Isabella closer as the prosecutor continued outlining the case. The baby slept through the proceedings, unaware that her father sat just yards away, unaware of the violence that had been planned against her mother. The first witness was FBI agent Sarah Chen, who testified about the investigation and the evidence recovery. She explained how Elena's recordings had provided crucial probable cause for search warrants, which led to the discovery of additional evidence hidden in offshore accounts and encrypted communications. The defendant maintained multiple secret communication channels, Agent Chen testified. We found evidence of financial fraud dating back 3 years, as well as detailed discussions about eliminating Mrs. Chen after the birth of their child. Defense attorney Rothstein tried to discredit the evidence, suggesting that Elena could have manufactured or altered the recordings. But Agent Chen's testimony was devastating. Our forensic analysis confirmed that all recordings were authentic and unaltered. Additionally, we recovered deleted messages from the defendant's devices that corroborated everything Mrs. Chen had documented. The second day of testimony focused on the financial crimes. Elena watched as prosecutors methodically dismantled Alexander's carefully constructed facade. Company accountants testified about missing funds, forged documents, and mysterious transfers to shell companies controlled by Jessica. The defendant stole approximately $47 million from Tech Vision Corp over a 3-year period, testified the company's forensic accountant. The money was used to fund personal expenses for both defendants, including luxury travel, real estate purchases, and expensive gifts. Elena felt a grim satisfaction as the scope of Alexander's betrayal became clear. It wasn't just personal. He had been stealing from investors, employees, and shareholders who had trusted him with their money. But it was the third day of testimony that truly shocked the courtroom. Elena took the witness stand wearing a simple black dress, Isabella sleeping in the arms of a court-appointed childcare specialist. She had prepared for this moment for months, working with prosecutors to organize her testimony for maximum impact. Mrs. Chen, Ada Morrison began gently. Please tell the jury how you discovered your husband's affair. Elena spoke clearly and calmly, describing that terrible night in the conference room. She detailed finding the messages, Alexander's reaction, and the gaslighting that followed. He convinced me that I was imagining things, Elena testified. For several hours, I actually wondered if pregnancy hormones were making me paranoid. It wasn't until I accessed the backup files that I realized the extent of his deception. And what did you find in those backup files? Elena turned to face the jury directly. I found hundreds of messages between my husband and Miss Morgan, dating back 8 months. They detailed not only their affair, but plans to kill me after I gave birth. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Judge Morrison gavelled for silence. Can you describe some of these messages? Elena took a deep breath. This was the hardest part, reliving those horrible words, spoken by the man she had loved and trusted. My husband referred to me as a breeding mare. He told Miss Morgan that I was only useful for producing an heir, and that once the baby was born, they would find a way to eliminate me permanently. Did these messages suggest specific methods? Yes. They discussed making my death look like suicide caused by postpartum depression. Miss Morgan also mentioned having contacts who could arrange an accident during delivery. Elena continued her testimony for 3 hours, walking the jury through the evidence methodically. She presented recordings, messages, and financial documents that painted a picture of a conspiracy far more extensive than anyone had initially imagined. Defense attorney Rothstein's cross-examination was aggressive, but ultimately ineffective. He tried to portray Elena as a vindictive wife seeking revenge, but the evidence was too strong and Elena's testimony too consistent. Isn't it true, Mrs. Chen, that you were angry about your husband's success, that you felt sidelined by his career? No, Elena replied calmly. I supported my husband's career completely. I gave up my own architectural practice to help him build Tech Vision Corp. I was proud of his success because I considered it our success. But you must have been jealous of Miss Morgan's position in the company. I was concerned about the amount of time they spent together. Yes, but that concern proved to be justified, didn't it? Rothstein tried several more angles of attack, but Elena remained composed and credible throughout. Her testimony concluded with a moment that would be replayed on news programs for weeks. Mrs. Chen, Ada Morrison asked in redirect, knowing everything you know now, is there anything you would have done differently? Elena considered the question carefully. I would have trusted my instincts sooner. I would have acted faster to protect myself and my daughter. But I don't regret exposing the truth. My husband was not only planning to kill me, he was stealing from thousands of people who trusted him. Someone had to stop him. And if you could say anything to your husband now, what would it be? Elena turned to look directly at Alexander for the first time since entering the courtroom. He met her gaze, his expression unreadable. I would tell him that actions have consequences, Elena said quietly. He taught me that everything in life is a transaction. Well, this is his bill coming due. The recording evidence was played for the jury on day 4. The courtroom listened in stunned silence as Alexander's voice filled the room, coldly discussing plans for Elena's murder. The pregnancy gives me good PR, the family man's CEO. But once it's over, we need to move fast. Elena's been suspicious lately. Maybe it's time to accelerate our timeline. With a properly documented history of mental illness, no one will question the suicide. Several jurors looked visibly disturbed. One woman was crying openly. Even Judge Morrison appeared shaken by the casual cruelty in Alexander's voice. Jessica's recorded voice was equally damning. I know people who could arrange an accident during delivery. Complications happen all the time. She's just the obstacle now. Once she's gone, we can have everything we want. The defense had no effective response to the recordings. Audio analysis confirmed their authenticity, and the content was too specific and detailed to have been fabricated. On day 5, the prosecution rested its case. The defense called character witnesses for Alexander business associates who testified about his professional reputation and philanthropic activities. But their testimony seemed hollow in the face of Alexander's own recorded words. Jessica's defense team tried a different strategy, portraying her as a young woman manipulated by a powerful older man. But the recordings made clear that she had been an eager and active participant in the conspiracy. Closing arguments lasted an entire day. Ada Morrison delivered a passionate summation that left the courtroom in absolute silence. Ladies and gentlemen, this case is about the most fundamental violation of trust imaginable. Alexander Chen swore to love, honor, and protect Elena Rodriguez. Instead, he betrayed her, stole from her, and planned to murder her. Jessica Morgan, meanwhile, pursued a married man and actively participated in planning the death of his pregnant wife. The prosecutor paused, letting his words sink in. The defendants want you to believe this was just an affair that got out of hand, but the evidence shows systematic, calculated evil. They planned Elena's death with the same cold efficiency they used to steal millions from innocent investors. He gestured toward Elena, who sat holding Isabella. But they made one crucial mistake. They underestimated the woman they were trying to destroy. Elena Rodriguez Chen is not a victim, she's a survivor. She's a hero who saved not only herself and her child, but exposed a criminal conspiracy that could have continued for years. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, the foreman stood and delivered the verdicts in a clear, strong voice. On the charge of conspiracy to commit murder, guilty. On the charge of racketeering, guilty. On the charge of fraud, guilty. On the charge of kidnapping, guilty. Alexander's face remained impassive as each guilty verdict was read, but Elena could see his hands trembling slightly. Jessica broke down completely, sobbing as the reality of her situation became clear. Judge Morrison scheduled sentencing for the following month, but she addressed the defendants immediately. Mr. Chen, Miss Morgan, I have presided over criminal cases for 23 years. In that time, I have seen every variety of human weakness and cruelty, but I have rarely encountered such calculated evil as you have displayed in this case. She turned specifically to Alexander. You held a position of tremendous trust as a CEO, as a husband, as a father. You violated that trust in every possible way. Your crimes were not committed in passion or desperation, but with cold calculation and complete disregard for human life. The judge's voice hardened. When you are sentenced next month, you will face the full consequences of your choices. I can promise you that. As court adjourned, Elena felt an overwhelming sense of relief. Justice was not yet complete, sentencing remained, but the truth had been told and believed. Alexander was led away in handcuffs, but he turned back once to look at Elena. She met his gaze steadily, no longer the terrified pregnant woman he had tried to destroy. She was stronger now, harder, transformed by fire into something unbreakable. It's over, Marcus whispered as they gathered their belongings. Elena looked down at Isabella, who was finally waking up, her tiny fists stretching toward the courtroom lights. No, Elena said softly. It's just beginning. 6 weeks later, Elena stood in the same courtroom for sentencing day. The media attention had only intensified. Her story had become a symbol of female empowerment and corporate accountability. Book publishers, movie producers, and speaking bureau agents had all reached out with offers. But today, Elena was focused on only one thing: watching justice be served. Judge Morrison entered the courtroom with an expression of grim determination. She had clearly given considerable thought to the sentencing, and her opening remarks left no doubt about her intentions. "The court has received numerous letters regarding sentencing in this case," she began. "Character references for both defendants, but also hundreds of letters from women who have found inspiration in Mrs. Chen's courage. The court has also received detailed victim impact statements that paint a clear picture of the harm caused by these crimes." Elena had submitted a 20-page victim impact statement, detailing not just the emotional trauma, but the financial damage Alexander's crimes had caused to shareholders, employees, and business partners. "Mr. Chen," Judge Morrison addressed Alexander directly, "please stand for sentencing." Alexander rose, flanked by his attorney. He had lost weight during his time in jail, and his usually perfect appearance was disheveled. The powerful CEO was gone, replaced by a man facing the consequences of his choices. "The court sentences you to 25 years in federal prison for conspiracy to commit murder, to run concurrently with 15 years for racketeering, 12 years for fraud, and 8 years for kidnapping. You will be eligible for parole in 20 years. Alexander showed no visible reaction, but Elena saw his shoulders slump slightly. "Additionally," Judge Morrison continued, "you are ordered to pay $47 million in restitution to Tech Vision Corp shareholders, plus an additional $25 million in civil damages to Mrs. Chen." Elena felt a surge of vindication. The financial judgment would ensure that Alexander could never profit from his crimes, and the restitution would help repair some of the damage he had caused. "Miss Morgan," the judge turned to Jessica, "please stand for sentencing." Jessica's transformation was even more dramatic than Alexander's. The confident, manipulative woman who had seduced a married man and planned murder was now pale and trembling. "The court sentences you to 20 years in federal prison for conspiracy to commit murder, to run concurrently with 10 years for racketeering and 8 years for fraud. You will be eligible for parole in 15 years. Jessica collapsed into her chair, sobbing. Her attorney patted her shoulder ineffectively. "Furthermore," Judge Morrison continued, "both defendants are permanently barred from serving as officers or directors of any publicly traded company. They are also ordered to surrender all assets obtained through criminal activity." As the sentencing concluded, Elena felt a profound sense of closure. The nightmare that had begun in that conference room 18 months ago was finally over. But her new life was just beginning. 3 months later, Elena stood in the boardroom of Tech Vision Corp., the same room where she had once caught Alexander with Jessica. But now the nameplate on the chair at the head of the table read, "Elena Rodriguez, Chief Executive Officer." The board of directors had unanimously elected her to replace Alexander after his conviction. The company's stock price had initially plummeted following the scandal, but Elena's leadership and vision had steadied the ship and restored investor confidence. "The Morrison account has exceeded all projections," reported David Kim, the new CFO Elena had hired to replace Alexander's corrupt financial team. "Our new transparency initiatives are being praised by shareholders and regulators alike." Elena nodded, reviewing the quarterly reports. Under her leadership, Tech Vision Corp. had not just recovered from Alexander's crimes, it had thrived. Revenue was up 40%, employee satisfaction was at an all-time high, and the company had become a model for ethical corporate governance. "Any other business?" Elena asked. "Actually, yes," said board member Sarah Patterson. "I wanted to formally congratulate you on the announcement of your book deal. Explosive Truths is already generating significant pre-order interest." Elena smiled. The book, which would detail her story and offer guidance to other women facing similar situations, was scheduled for publication next year. She had also agreed to a documentary deal, with proceeds going to her newly established foundation. "Thank you. I hope it can help other women find their voices when they're facing impossible situations." After the meeting concluded, Elena returned to her corner office, Alexander's former domain, completely redesigned to reflect her architectural sensibilities. The space was brighter now, more open, with floor-to-ceiling windows that flooded the room with natural light. Isabella's portable crib sat in one corner, where she napped peacefully while Elena worked. At 14 months old, Isabella was a happy, healthy toddler who had no memory of the darkness that had surrounded her birth. Elena's assistant knocked on the open door. "Mrs. Rodriguez, your 3 o'clock appointment is here. Send him in, please." Marcus Williams entered the office, carrying a thick legal folder. Their working relationship had evolved into something deeper over the past year, a partnership built on mutual respect and shared experiences. "How did the deposition go?" Elena asked. "Very well. Alexander's appeal was officially denied this morning. He'll serve the full sentence." Elena felt a brief moment of satisfaction. Alexander's lawyers had argued that his confession was coerced and that Elena had entrapped him, but the appeals court had found no merit in these claims. And Jessica, still serving her time, no appeals pending. Marcus sat across from Elena's desk. "There is one other matter, though. Alexander has been requesting to see Isabella." Elena's expression hardened. "Absolutely not. That's what I told his lawyer. But legally, he does have parental rights. He gave up those rights when he planned to murder her mother," Elena said firmly. "Isabella will never know that man exists if I have anything to say about it." Marcus nodded. "I agree completely. I just wanted you to be aware that he's still trying." They discussed several other legal matters before Marcus prepared to leave. At the door, he paused. "Elena, I have to ask, do you ever regret it, going through with all of this?" Elena considered the question seriously. "You mean, do I regret destroying my marriage, sending the father of my child to prison, and turning my life upside down?" "Something like that." Elena looked out the window at the Manhattan skyline, then at her sleeping daughter, then at the thriving company she now led. "Marcus, 18 months ago, I was a woman with no identity beyond being Alexander Chen's wife. I had given up my career, my independence, my voice. I was living a lie without even knowing it." She stood and walked to the window. "That woman was going to die, either literally, at Alexander's hands, or figuratively, as she continued to fade into nothing. The woman I am now, she was born in that conference room when I saw those text messages. Everything that happened afterward was just labor pains." Marcus smiled. "That's very poetic. It's also true. I didn't destroy my life, I saved it. And I saved Isabella's life too. Alexander would have been a terrible father, assuming he didn't eventually see her as a threat to his new life with Jessica." "Speaking of Jessica," Marcus said, "I heard she's been writing letters to various media outlets, claiming she was manipulated and asking for sympathy." Elena shrugged. "Let her write all the letters she wants. The recordings speak for themselves." After Marcus left, Elena spent the rest of the afternoon reviewing proposals for the Elena Rodriguez Foundation, which provided legal and financial assistance to women escaping abusive relationships. The foundation had already helped dozens of women, and Elena found this work more fulfilling than any business success. At 6 p.m., she gathered Isabella and her things, preparing to leave for their penthouse apartment, a new space she had purchased, with no connection to her life with Alexander. As they waited for the elevator, Elena's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "I know you're reading this. Elena, we need to talk. I have information about Alexander that you need to know. Meet me tomorrow at Cafe Luna, 2 p.m. Come alone. A friend." Elena stared at the message, her blood running cold. Alexander was in federal prison. Jessica was serving her sentence, and all their known associates had been investigated. Who could be sending this message, more importantly? What information about Alexander could still be relevant? Elena deleted the message without responding, but she couldn't shake the feeling that her ordeal was not quite over. The next morning, Elena's security consultant, a former FBI agent named Tom Brady, reviewed the mysterious text message with her. "It could be a crank," Brady said. "You've gotten a lot of media attention. Some people are drawn to that. But you don't think so." "No, I don't. The phrasing suggests someone with real information, and the fact that they know your private number is concerning." Elena had been receiving threats and strange messages since the trial, but this felt different, more serious. "What do you recommend?" If you're determined to meet this person, we do it safely. Surveillance, backup, controlled environment. But honestly, Elena, I'd recommend ignoring it entirely. Elena spent the morning wrestling with the decision. Part of her wanted to ignore the message and move on with her new life. But another part, the part that had driven her to investigate Alexander in the first place, needed to know what this was about. At 1:30 p.m., she found herself walking into Cafe Luna in the village. Brady and two other security personnel positioned discreetly throughout the establishment. Elena chose a table near the back, with clear sight lines to all entrances. At exactly 2 p.m., a woman in her 50s approached the table. She was well-dressed but nervous, constantly glancing around as if afraid of being followed. "Mrs. Rodriguez, I'm Catherine Morrison." Elena gestured for her to sit. "You sent the message." "Yes. I apologize for the cloak and dagger approach, but I wasn't sure if my communications were being monitored. Who are you and what information do you have about Alexander?" Catherine Morrison pulled out a tablet and placed it on the table between them. "I'm a forensic accountant. I've been investigating Alexander Chen's financial activities for the past 3 years, under contract with several insurance companies and investment firms." Elena leaned forward, interested despite her caution. "What I discovered," Catherine continued, "goes far beyond what came out in the criminal trial. Alexander wasn't just stealing from Tech Vision Corp. He was running a sophisticated money laundering operation involving at least 12 other companies and possibly organized crime connections." The tablet displayed a complex web of financial transactions, shell companies, and international transfers. The money he stole from Tech Vision was just the tip of the iceberg. Over the past 5 years, Alexander moved approximately $200 million through various illegal channels. Some of that money belongs to very dangerous people. Elena felt her blood run cold. "What does this have to do with me? Some of these people believe you have information about where their money is hidden. Alexander apparently told them that you were involved in his operations, that you helped manage the offshore accounts. That's completely false. I never had anything to do with his business dealings beyond supporting his career." "I believe you," Catherine said, "but they don't. And they're starting to ask questions about why you're living so comfortably while their money remains missing." Elena's mind raced. "How immediate is this threat?" "I don't know, but my sources suggest that some very serious people are planning to approach you soon. They want their money back, and they think you can lead them to it." Elena thanked Catherine for the information and arranged to meet again the following week. As she left the cafe, her mind was spinning with the implications of what she'd learned. Back in her office, Elena called an emergency meeting with Marcus, Tom Brady, and David Kim from Tech Vision's finance department. "We need to conduct a complete forensic audit of every account Alexander had access to," Elena announced. "If there's missing money that belongs to organized crime, we need to find it before they come looking for it." The investigation took 2 weeks. What they discovered was staggering. Alexander had indeed been running a massive money laundering operation, using Tech Vision Corp as a front for moving illegal funds. Millions of dollars in drug money, arms dealing profits, and extortion payments had been funneled through fake consulting contracts and overseas investments. Most concerning was the discovery that Alexander had created several accounts in Elena's name, without her knowledge or consent. To outside observers, it would appear that she had been a willing participant in the money laundering scheme. "This is why he wanted to kill me," Elena realized during one late-night strategy session. It wasn't just about the affair or the inheritance. If I had died, these accounts would have been discovered during estate proceedings, and everyone would have assumed I was Alexander's partner in crime. He would have been the grieving widower whose wife had secretly been involved in criminal activities. Marcus nodded grimly. "It's actually brilliant, in a sociopathic way. Your death would have explained the missing money and cleared Alexander of suspicion." "So what do we do now?" Tom Brady answered. "We cooperate fully with law enforcement, document everything that proves your innocence, and prepare for the possibility that Alexander's criminal associates will make contact." They didn't have to wait long. 3 days later, Elena received a call at her office from a man with a slight accent, possibly Italian or Eastern European. Mrs. Rodriguez, my name is Dimitri. I represent certain business interests that have been affected by your husband's financial irregularities. Elena activated the recording system that had been installed on all her phones. I don't know what you're talking about, she said calmly. I think you do. Your husband was holding approximately $50 million that belongs to my associates. That money has disappeared. We believe you know where it is. I don't, and Alexander is my ex-husband. I have no connection to his business activities. Mrs. Rodriguez, my associates are not patient people. They want their money, and they will get it one way or another. If you cooperate, this can be resolved peacefully. If you don't, the line went dead. Elena immediately called Tom Brady and Marcus. Within an hour, FBI agents were in her office. Recording devices were being installed throughout her apartment and office, and a protection detail was being arranged. This is actually an opportunity, explained Agent Sarah Chen, who had led the original investigation into Alexander. We've been trying to identify and prosecute these money laundering networks for years. If they approach you directly, we can finally get the evidence we need. Elena felt like she was living through a nightmare again, but this time she was prepared. The frightened pregnant woman who had stumbled onto Alexander's conspiracy was gone, replaced by someone who understood how to fight back. Over the next month, Elena worked closely with the FBI to track down the missing money and identify the criminal network Alexander had been working with. The investigation led to a massive multi-agency operation that ultimately resulted in dozens of arrests and the recovery of over $100 million in stolen funds. Elena's role as an informant remained secret, but her cooperation was instrumental in dismantling one of the largest money laundering operations in New York's history. When it was all over, Agent Chen paid Elena a final visit. You know, the agent said, in my 20 years with the Bureau, I've never seen a civilian adapt to this kind of situation the way you have. You could have hired bodyguards, and hoped the problem would go away. Instead, you fought back. Elena smiled. I learned something important during this whole experience. The only way to truly be safe is to make sure the people who threaten you can't threaten anyone else. Any regrets? Elena looked out her office window at the city skyline, then at Isabella playing with toys in her corner of the office. None at all. 2 years later, Elena stood at the podium of the largest auditorium at Columbia Business School, looking out at an audience of 500 students, faculty, and business leaders. Her book, Explosive Truths from Betrayal to Billions, had just hit #1 on the New York Times bestseller list, and she was in demand as a speaker on topics ranging from corporate ethics to personal empowerment. When I discovered my husband's betrayal, Elena told the rapt audience, I had a choice. I could have remained a victim, or I could have become a survivor. I chose to become something more. I chose to become a force for justice. The audience erupted in applause. Elena had told her story dozens of times now, but it never got easier. Reliving those dark months was always painful, but she knew the message was important. Today, Tech Vision Corp is valued at over $2 billion. We employ 5,000 people and have become a model for ethical business practices. The Elena Rodriguez Foundation has helped over 200 women escape abusive situations and rebuild their lives. And my daughter Isabella is growing up in a world where her mother's strength, not her father's crimes, will define her legacy. After the speech, Elena was approached by a young woman who looked nervous but determined. Mrs. Rodriguez, my name is Sarah Kim. I think my husband is stealing from his company, and I found some messages on his phone that scared me. I don't know what to do. Elena handed the woman her card. Call this number tomorrow. We'll help you figure out what's happening and what your options are. As Elena gathered her belongings, she reflected on how far she had come. The terrified pregnant woman who had discovered those explosive texts seemed like a different person now, someone from another lifetime. Isabella, now 3 years old, ran up to her mother with a drawing she had made during the speech. Mommy, I drew you, she announced proudly. The drawing showed a stick figure woman standing on top of what appeared to be a mountain, with the sun shining brightly overhead. "It's beautiful," Elena said, lifting her daughter into her arms. "What's the mountain?" "That's all the bad guys you beat up," Isabella said matter-of-factly. "And you're the queen of the mountain now." Elena laughed, kissing her daughter's forehead. In the simplistic wisdom of a 3-year-old, Isabella had captured something profound. Elena had climbed a mountain of betrayal, corruption, and danger. And now, standing at the summit, she could see clearly in all directions. Alexander was serving his sentence in federal prison. Jessica had been released early for good behavior, but had disappeared into obscurity. The money laundering network had been dismantled. The victims had been made whole. Justice had been served. But more than that, Elena had discovered something about herself that she never knew existed. She was stronger than she had ever imagined, braver than she had ever been tested to be, and more capable than she had ever been allowed to become. As they left the auditorium, Elena's phone buzzed with a text message. For a moment, her blood ran cold, memories of threatening messages and dangerous encounters flooding back. But this message was different. "Elena, this is Marcus. The adoption papers for Isabella have been finalized. She's officially my daughter now, too. Can't wait to celebrate with both my girls tonight. Love you." Elena smiled, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. A year ago, she and Marcus had married in a simple ceremony attended by close friends and colleagues. Marcus had formally adopted Isabella, giving her the stable, loving father figure that Elena had always wanted for her daughter. Alexander had fought the adoption from prison, but the courts had ruled that his parental rights were forfeit due to his conviction for planning to murder Isabella's mother. As Elena and Isabella walked through Central Park toward their apartment, Elena marveled at the unexpected turns her life had taken. 2 years ago, she had been a victim. Today, she was a CEO, an author, an advocate, a wife, and a mother. Most importantly, she was free. Her phone rang, an international number she didn't recognize. For a moment, Elena hesitated, but then she remembered who she was now, what she had survived, what she had built. She answered confidently, "Elena Rodriguez speaking." "Mrs. Rodriguez, this is Detective Sarah Morrison from Scotland Yard. We're investigating a financial fraud case that may have connections to your ex-husband's criminal network. Would you be willing to assist with our investigation?" Elena looked at Isabella, who was chasing pigeons with infectious joy. Then at the Manhattan skyline where Tech Vision Corp's logo shone from the top of their building. "Detective Morrison," Elena said, "I'd be happy to help. When do we start?" The fight for justice, Elena had learned, never really ended. But that was okay. She had found her calling, her purpose, her voice, and she was just getting started. Have you ever witnessed a moment so catastrophic, so profoundly wrong, that the air itself seems to crystallize? A moment where a life, carefully built and polished for the world to see, shatters into a million pieces under the glare of 1,000 lights. Tonight, we take you inside the gilded ballroom of the St. Regis Legacy Gala, where the city's elite gathered to celebrate philanthropy and power. It was a night meant to honor one man's meteoric rise, but it will forever be remembered for one woman's unimaginable strength in the face of the ultimate betrayal. This is the story of a public kiss, a silent wife, and the 5 words that brought an empire to its knees. The ballroom was a galaxy of manufactured stars. Chandeliers, heavy with Austrian crystal, dripped light onto a sea of silk, velvet, and tailored tuxedos. The air, thick with the scent of lilies and expensive perfume, vibrated with the low hum of performative laughter and whispered negotiations. For Clara, the gilded cage, as she privately called it, had become her life's backdrop. Tonight, it felt particularly suffocating. Her hand rested instinctively on the gentle swell of her stomach, a silent conversation with the new life that kicked softly beneath the layers of her emerald gown. 7 months. 7 months of morning sickness, swollen ankles, and a profound, bone-deep joy that felt like the only real thing in this glittering, hollow world. The baby was her anchor, her secret truth. Across the table, her husband Leo was holding court. He wasn't just in his element, he was the element, the magnetic force around which everyone else orbited. His laugh was a rich, confident baritone that sliced through the room's chatter, drawing more people into his circle. His smile, the one that had once been reserved for her across a rickety table in a tiny apartment, was now a public commodity, freely traded for admiration and influence. He was being honored tonight, the Visionary of the Year award for his real estate empire, a concrete and glass testament to his ambition. Their empire, that's what he called it. Clara watched him, a familiar ache blooming in her chest. She remembered the man who sketched blueprints on napkins, his eyes wild with dreams, his hands calloused from hauling materials himself. That man had needed her. He had seen her, not just as a beautiful woman on his arm, but as the co-architect of his vision. Her degree in structural engineering wasn't just a piece of paper. It had been the bedrock of their first projects, her calculations ensuring his grand designs didn't collapse under the weight of his own ambition. But that man was a ghost now, replaced by this polished, untouchable figure. He no longer sought her counsel on support beams and tensile strength. He consulted with a board of directors and a PR team. He no longer held her hand with a desperate grip that said, "We're in this together." He placed it on the small of her back with a proprietary firmness that said, "You belong to me." He's a marvel, isn't he? A woman named Beatrice, draped in diamonds that could fund a small nation, purred beside her. Everything he touches turns to gold. Clara offered a practiced, gentle smile. He's always been driven. The word felt inadequate, like using damp to describe a tsunami. Leo's drive was a force of nature, a relentless engine that had propelled them from nothing to this. A penthouse overlooking the park, a fleet of cars they never drove, and a table at a gala where their presence was a status symbol. But lately she wondered what that engine was fueled by. It used to be a shared dream. Now she feared it ran on something else entirely. Ego, adoration, and something colder. Her eyes scanned the room, a nervous habit she'd developed over the past year. She was looking for a shadow, a presence that had become a splinter in her mind, and she found it. Standing near the grand archway, cloaked in a gown the color of blood, was Serafina. She was Leo's head of public relations, a woman who had weaponized her own allure with terrifying precision. Her cheekbones were sharp enough to cut glass, and her eyes, a piercing shade of gray, were locked on Leo. There was a predatory stillness about her, the calm of a shark that knows the tide is turning in its favor. Clara had felt the shift months ago. It wasn't one thing, but 100 small, sharp cuts. The late-night strategy sessions that left Leo's shirt smelling of a perfume that wasn't hers, a heavy, cloying scent of jasmine and musk. The way he started guarding his phone like it was a state secret. The intimate, coded language they shared in meetings, full of inside jokes and shared glances that excluded everyone else, especially her. She had tried to dismiss it as paranoia, a cruel trick of pregnancy hormones. She had confronted him once, her voice trembling. "Leo, is there something going on with Serafina?" He had laughed, a hollow, dismissive sound. "Darling, don't be ridiculous. She works for me. She's brilliant, but she's an asset, not a threat. You're my wife. You're the mother of my child. Don't you know you're my entire world?" He had tilted her chin up, kissed her forehead, and the conversation was over. A masterful performance of reassurance that did nothing to soothe the frantic bird of panic beating against her ribs. Tonight, watching them across the ballroom, the denial felt flimsy, pathetic. Serafina wasn't looking at Leo like an employee. She was looking at him with a raw, possessive hunger that mirrored the way he was smiling at his audience. They were two sides of the same coin, minted in ambition and polished with deceit. A waiter appeared offering champagne. Clara politely declined, her hand once again finding the curve of her belly. The baby kicked, a sharp, insistent jab, as if it could feel its mother's distress. She whispered to it, a silent promise. "I'll protect you, no matter what." The lights began to dim, and the master of ceremonies, a jovial TV personality, took the stage. "And now," his voice boomed, "the moment we've all been waiting for. To present our Visionary of the Year award, A man whose integrity and commitment to family values are as solid as the foundations he builds. Mr. Leo Vance. A spotlight found their table. The room erupted in applause. Leo stood, buttoning his jacket, the perfect picture of success. He leaned down to kiss her, but his lips were cool and distracted, his eyes already on the stage. "Wish me luck," he murmured, his breath smelling of expensive whiskey. As he walked away, his back straight and his stride confident, Clara felt a cold dread wash over her, so intense it stole her breath. It was the feeling of standing on a beautifully constructed bridge, one she had helped design, and hearing the first sickening groan of metal fatigue, the first splintering of the foundation, knowing it was all about to come crashing down. The applause for Leo was a wave of sound that crashed over Clara, threatening to pull her under. As he ascended the stage, bathed in the adoring glow of the spotlight, her mind fled the suffocating present and sought refuge in the past. It was a defense mechanism, a way to remember the man she had loved before he became this monument to himself. She was transported back 12 years to a cramped fourth-floor walk-up that always smelled of turpentine from the artist downstairs and roasted garlic from their own tiny kitchen. They were broke, but they hadn't felt poor. They were rich in ideas, fueled by cheap coffee and a shared ferocious belief in a future they would build with their own hands. She remembered one night a thunderstorm rattling the window panes. Leo was hunched over the floor, which was covered in a sprawling, hand-drawn blueprint. It was his first solo project proposal, a community arts center. His brow was furrowed in frustration. "It won't work," he had muttered, tossing his pencil down. "The load-bearing walls, the budget for the steel framing is impossible. The whole design is a failure." Clara, then a graduate student, her hair tied in a messy knot, had knelt beside him. She'd spent hours looking at his drawings, not as a supportive girlfriend, but as a peer. She saw the beauty in his fluid, ambitious lines, but she also saw the structural flaws. "It's not a failure, Leo," she had said softly, her finger tracing a line on the paper. "It's a challenge. Your vision is magnificent, but you're trying to force it into a conventional frame. What if we use a combination of glulam beams and a reinforced concrete core? We can open up the interior space, reduce the steel cost, and make the structure itself a piece of art." He had looked at her, his exhaustion momentarily forgotten, a spark of understanding in his eyes. For the next 3 hours they worked, their minds in perfect sync. He was the poet of space and light. She was the logician of stress and support. Together they found the solution. He got the contract. That night, holding her in their lumpy bed, he had whispered into her hair, "We did it, Clara. We did it. You're my foundation. Without you, I'm just a pile of bricks." That phrase, "my foundation," had become his term of endearment for her. It was the promise upon which their life was built. He was the soaring skyscraper, and she was the unseen, unglamorous, but absolutely essential bedrock that made his ascent possible. She'd left her promising career at a prestigious engineering firm to join him when he started Advanced Developments, becoming his silent, untitled partner. She reviewed every blueprint, caught every miscalculation, and ensured his dreams could withstand the laws of physics. She never asked for public credit. Seeing their shared vision rise into the city skyline was enough. A fresh wave of applause from the ballroom jolted her back to the present. Leo was at the podium now, his hand resting on the gleaming crystal award. His smile was dazzling, a 1,000-watt beacon of charm. "Thank you," he began, his voice smooth and practiced. "I am humbled. Truly. A man is nothing without his vision, but a vision is nothing without the people who believe in it." Clara's heart clenched. He was using their old lines, the ones they'd rehearsed in the mirror of their tiny bathroom before his first big pitch. But the words, once so full of genuine humility, now sounded rehearsed and hollow, part of a script he had long since memorized. Her gaze drifted back to Serafina. She was standing now, partially obscured by a pillar, but her posture was rigid with anticipation. She looked like a runner at the starting block, waiting for the pistol shot. Why? Why did this moment feel so orchestrated? Another memory, this one more recent and far more painful, surfaced. It was 6 weeks ago. She had come home early from a prenatal appointment, the ultrasound picture, a grainy, miraculous image of their child, tucked in her purse. She'd walked into the house, her heart full, ready to surprise Leo. She found him in his home office with Serafina. The door was ajar. They weren't yelling. The silence was far worse. Serafina was standing before his desk, her arms crossed. Leo was leaning back in his chair, his face a mask of strained patience. "You promised, Leo." Serafina's voice was a low, dangerous hiss. "You said after the Legacy Gala, you said it would be the perfect time to reshape the narrative." "And it will be," Leo had replied, his tone wary. "Just be patient, Serafina. This is complicated." "Complicated?" She had laughed, a short, ugly sound. "A pregnant wife is a complication. It's not a life sentence. We have a plan. The board is on my side. They see the future, our future. Don't let a temporary biological condition derail everything we've worked for." Clara had backed away, her hand clamped over her mouth to stifle a sob. Reshape the narrative. A temporary biological condition. The clinical, brutal words had echoed in her mind for weeks. The baby wasn't a joy to them. It was a complication. She wasn't a wife. She was a narrative to be managed. Now in the ballroom, the pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. The gala wasn't just about an award. It was a platform. The perfect time, as Serafina had called it. On stage, Leo was continuing his speech. "And to my team, who worked tirelessly behind the scenes, your dedication is the steel in our towers." He paused, taking a sip of water. His eyes scanned the room, and for a fleeting, heart-stopping moment, they met Clara's. She saw a flash of something in his gaze. Not love, not remorse, but a flicker of pity? It was the look one gives to something beautiful right before smashing it. He looked away quickly, his gaze sweeping over the audience until it landed, with deliberate intent, on the woman in the blood-red dress. The air in Clara's lungs turned to ice. It was happening. Right now. She could feel the tectonic plates of her life beginning to shift, the foundation she had so carefully built starting to crack, preparing to give way to an earthquake of his making. "There is one person in particular," Leo continued, his voice dropping to a more intimate, conspiratorial tone, "without whom none of this would be possible." A collective sigh of sentimentality rippled through the audience. They leaned forward, expecting the obligatory, heartwarming tribute to the devoted wife. Cameras turned toward Clara, their lenses hungry for the reaction shot, the gentle, tearful smile of the woman behind the great man. She could feel the weight of their expectations, a physical pressure on her skin. Her face felt like a porcelain mask, fragile and cold. "Say my name," she pleaded silently, a desperate, childish prayer. "Leo, please, just say my name. Remember who your foundation is." Leo's eyes, however, remained fixed on the spot near the archway. "This person came into my life when Vance Developments was just a name, a brand. I had the vision, yes, but she gave it a soul. She taught me how to communicate that vision, how to make the world see what I saw. She is more than a colleague. She is my muse." The word hung in the air, glittering and venomous. Muse. It was a word of intimacy, of inspiration, of a connection that transcended the professional. It was not a word a man used to describe his publicist. A confused murmur rippled through the ballroom. People began to shift in their seats, their heads turning from Leo on stage to Clara at the table, and then toward the archway, following his intense gaze. The journalists at the press table were scribbling furiously, their professional instincts smelling blood in the water. Clara's own blood ran cold. The mask was cracking. She could feel a tremor starting in her hands and willed it to stop. She would not fall apart, not here, not in front of them. She thought of the ultrasound picture, of the tiny, perfect spine, the fiercely beating heart. This was no longer just about her own heartbreak. It was about the child who deserved a mother, not a victim. On stage, Leo seemed to swell with a strange, reckless energy, as if he were drawing power from the room's confusion. He was no longer following a script. He was improvising, drunk on the drama he was creating. "She has been my guiding star in the darkest nights, my sharpest critic, and my fiercest believer," he declared, his voice ringing with a conviction that was chillingly authentic. "She is the architect of my public soul." He raised his hand, beckoning. "Serafina, please come up here." The name was a gunshot in the silent room. Serafina stepped out from behind the pillar. The spotlight, as if on cue, swung from Leo to find her, bathing her in a halo of white light. Her red dress was a slash of defiance against the ballroom's muted tones. She didn't look surprised or shy. She looked triumphant. This was her coronation. She walked toward the stage, not with the hesitant steps of an employee, but with the measured, confident stride of a queen claiming her throne. The audience was utterly captivated, trapped in a state of suspended disbelief. This was no longer a charity gala. It was a public execution. Beatrice, the woman beside Clara, gasped, her hand flying to her diamond-encrusted throat. "My God," she whispered, her eyes wide with horrified delight. Clara didn't watch Serafina's ascent. She couldn't. Instead, she focused on a single point of light reflecting off a water glass on her table. She anchored herself to it, narrowing her entire world down to that one insignificant sparkle. Breathe in, breathe out. The baby kicked again, a frantic flutter. "I'm here, Mama. I'm with you." The sound of Serafina's heels clicking on the stage steps brought Clara's head up. She was beside Leo now, her hand possessively on his arm. They stood together, a new power couple being forged in the crucible of public humiliation. Leo looked down at her, his face alight with a feverish adoration that he hadn't shown Clara in years. "Serafina," he said, his voice thick with emotion, holding up the crystal award between them. "This isn't mine. It's ours." The room was so quiet that Clara could hear the frantic whirring and clicking of the cameras. They were vultures, documenting every nuance of her disgrace. She could feel hundreds of pairs of eyes on her, a morbid, collective stare. They were watching her, waiting for the inevitable breakdown. They wanted tears, they wanted screams. They wanted the satisfying drama of the scorned, hysterical, pregnant wife. She felt a strange, cold calm settle over her. The shock was so profound it had burned away the panic, leaving behind something hard and clear. She was no longer a wife in that moment. She was a structural engineer, analyzing a catastrophic failure. She saw the flawed design, the compromised materials, the shoddy workmanship of the life she had been living. She saw it all with brutal, unforgiving clarity. Leo leaned in toward Serafina, his hand moving from her arm to cup her face. It was a gesture of exquisite tenderness, a gesture that had once belonged only to Clara. He was giving it all away. Their past, their intimacy, their future. He was liquidating every asset of their marriage right here on this stage. And then he kissed her. It wasn't a chaste peck on the cheek. It was a deep, searing kiss, a declaration. His body angled toward Serafina, completely shutting Clara out of the picture, both literally and metaphorically. The cameras flashed in a blinding, percussive frenzy, capturing the image that would be on the front page of every paper by morning. The visionary, his award, and his muse. The wife, an inconvenient footnote, relegated to the shadows. The kiss was a physical blow. Clara felt the impact in her chest, a violent, concussive force that seemed to stop her heart. The world narrowed to a single horrific tableau under the glare of the stage lights. Her husband, the father of her child, claiming another woman as his own in the most public way imaginable. The cacophony of camera flashes was the only sound in the room, a series of staccato explosions that burned the image onto her retina. Leo's hand tangled in Serafina's dark hair. Serafina's hand on his chest, her fingers splayed over his heart. A tableau of passion and betrayal, perfectly framed for mass consumption. Time seemed to warp. A second stretched into an eternity. In that dilated moment, Clara's mind fractured, showing her a slideshow of her life with Leo. But now every image was tainted, recontextualized by this final, brutal act. She saw their wedding day, Leo whispering always against her ear, his promise now tasting like ash in her memory. She saw them painting the nursery just last month, Leo's hand resting on her belly, his eyes full of what she had mistaken for paternal awe, but now understood as guilt, or worse, pity. She saw every late night he'd worked, every business trip he'd taken, every distracted kiss, and understood that she had not been sharing him with his ambition. She had been sharing him with another woman. The kiss finally ended. They broke apart, but remained close, breathless, their foreheads touching. They were in their own world, a bubble of shared treachery, oblivious to the shockwave they had sent through the room. It was Leo who seemed to come to his senses first, his eyes dazed and unfocused, slowly scanned the silent audience, and finally, inevitably, found Clara. The triumphant, feverish glow on his face vanished, replaced by a flicker of dawning horror. It wasn't remorse, it was the look of a gambler who had pushed all his chips onto the table in a moment of reckless ecstasy and was only now beginning to calculate the cost of his bet. He had expected a private fallout, a messy scene behind closed doors. He had not anticipated this chilling, absolute silence, this collective, judgmental stare. And in that moment, as his eyes locked with hers, Clara realized something profound. He wasn't looking at her as his wife. He was looking at her as a problem to be solved, a piece of collateral damage in his grand redesign. The pain was a white-hot nova inside her, so immense it threatened to incinerate her from the inside out. The urge to act on it was primal, to scream, to throw a glass, to run from the room, sobbing, and give the vultures the dramatic scene they craved. Her body tensed, her nails digging into her palms, drawing blood. But then the baby kicked. It wasn't a gentle flutter this time. It was a hard, definitive thump, a tiny foot pressing against her ribs as if to say, "Stay, fight." And in that instant, another image flooded her mind, eclipsing all the others. It was a memory from her childhood, one she had buried deep. She was 10 years old, watching her own mother pack a suitcase, her face pale and tear-streaked. Her father, a man who had gambled away their savings, stood in the doorway, begging, promising to change. Her mother had hesitated, her hand on the doorknob, her spirit broken. She had stayed, and her life, and Clara's childhood, had been a long, slow surrender to a man who would never change. Clara had sworn to herself then, with the fierce, silent vow of a wounded child, that she would never be that woman. She would never allow her own child to witness her surrender. That single memory, that old, deep-seated trauma, became her armor. It fused with the raw, protective instinct of a mother-to-be, and in the crucible of her public humiliation, a new kind of strength was forged. The pain was still there, a living thing with claws and teeth, but it was no longer in control. She was. She slowly, deliberately relaxed her hands. She took a breath, not a shaky, panicked gasp, but a deep, centering inhalation that filled her lungs and calmed the frantic beating of her heart. She pushed her chair back, the soft scrape of its legs on the polished floor sounding like a thunderclap in the silent room. And she stood up. Her movements were graceful, unhurried. She adjusted the emerald fabric of her gown over her belly, a gesture that was both maternal and regal. She did not look at Leo. She did not look at Serafina. She looked out at the hundreds of frozen faces, the sea of diamonds in judgment, and she met their gaze one by one. The silence in the room shifted. It was no longer just the silence of shock. It deepened, thickened, becoming something else entirely. It was the silence of anticipation, the silence of a crowd that realizes the main event is not over. It has just begun. Every person in that ballroom, from the city's mayor to the busboys clearing glasses, was motionless. They had come expecting a predictable award ceremony. They had been given a scandalous drama, but now watching the pregnant, betrayed wife rise to her feet with the poise of a monarch, they sensed they were about to witness something far more rare, an execution of a different kind. The air crackled with a tension so palpable it felt electric. Leo and Serafina, frozen on stage, were no longer the center of attention. They were merely supporting actors. The spotlight, in every sense of the word, had shifted. It was now entirely on Clara. As Clara stood, the world seemed to hold its breath. The hum of the air conditioning, the distant clatter from the kitchens, the very pulse of the city outside seemed to fade away, leaving only the sound of her own steady breathing. She was the calm at the center of a hurricane of her husband's making. On stage, Leo's face had gone ashen. The confident visionary had vanished, replaced by a man dangling over a precipice, finally understanding the height of his fall. Serafina, too, had lost her triumphant glow. Her hand, which had been resting so possessively on Leo's arm, had slipped away. She looked small and tawdry under the harsh lights, a co-conspirator in a crime that had suddenly become far more serious than she had anticipated. They had planned a coup, a strategic reshaping of the narrative. They had not planned for a revolution. Clara's gaze swept over the audience and she saw not a faceless mob, but individuals. She saw the pity in some eyes, the morbid curiosity in others. She saw the barely concealed glee on the faces of Leo's rivals. And she saw, at a table near the back, the worried, compassionate face of her oldest friend, Mark, who had been Leo's best man and was now watching this nightmare unfold. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod, a silent message of support that fortified her resolve. She knew what they were all expecting: tears, recriminations, a messy, emotional scene that would confirm their preconceived notions of a woman scorned. They expected her to be the victim, the martyr in this sordid play. She would give them something else entirely. She did not start walking toward the stage to confront them. That would be their scene, on their terms. Instead, she turned and began to walk toward the host's podium at the side of the stage, which had been abandoned when the drama began. Her steps were measured and deliberate. The train of her emerald gown whispered behind her on the marble floor. With every step, she could feel herself shedding the identity that had defined her for the last 12 years. Leo Vance's supportive wife, the foundation, the woman behind the man. She was shedding it like a skin she had outgrown, and with every step she felt lighter, taller. She reached the podium. A microphone stood there, tall and slender. She adjusted it downward with a steady hand, the small movement echoing in the cavernous silence. She looked out at the room, her posture perfect, her chin high. There was no tremor in her hands, no quaver in her breath. There was only a profound, almost terrifying calm. "Good evening," she said. Her voice, amplified by the sound system, filled the entire ballroom. It was not the voice of a weeping victim. It was clear, calm, and resonant, with an undertone of steel. The two simple words cut through the tension like a surgeon's scalpel. On stage, Leo flinched as if he'd been struck. Clara paused, letting the silence stretch again, commanding the room's absolute attention. She was not a guest at this gala anymore. She was its master. "I'd like to take a moment," she continued, her voice even and controlled, "to congratulate my husband, Leo, on his Visionary of the Year award. It is a testament to his remarkable ability to construct compelling narratives." A quiet gasp rippled through the audience. The polite, coded language of the elite had been breached. This was not a concession. It was a counterattack, delivered with surgical precision. She had taken their narrative, the one they had tried to reshape, and turned it into a weapon. Her eyes finally, deliberately, moved to meet Leo's. She looked directly at him, across the stage, across the chasm that had opened between them. "You once told me, Leo," she said, her voice softening just a fraction, drawing the audience in closer, "that I was your foundation, that without me, you were just a pile of bricks. I believed you." She let that hang in the air for a beat. "Tonight you've shown me the truth. A foundation is not a muse. It is not glamorous or exciting. It is simply the unseen, uncelebrated thing you stand on to reach greater heights. And once you're high enough, you forget it's even there." Her words were not angry, they were elegiac. It was a eulogy for their marriage, delivered with a quiet dignity that was more devastating than any scream could ever be. She then turned her gaze to Serafina, who visibly recoiled. Clara did not address her with contempt or rage. She addressed her with something far more dismissive: indifference. "And to Ms. Renaud," Clara said, using Serafina's formal surname, instantly demoting her from muse to employee, "I wish you the best of luck with your newest project. I've reviewed the schematics. The design is ambitious, but I have serious concerns about the structural integrity. The foundation is compromised." The double meaning was brutally clear. The room was now utterly mesmerized. No one was eating. No one was drinking. No one dared even to breathe too loudly. They were witnessing a masterclass in composure, a public dismantling of two powerful people by a woman who had every right to be in a heap on the floor. Clara's hand came to rest once more on her belly. This was the final act. "Leo and I," she announced, her voice ringing with newfound authority, "are expecting our first child, a new life that will be built on a foundation of truth, strength, and integrity. Everything this award was supposed to celebrate." She paused, her eyes sweeping the room one last time. "And that is why, effective immediately, I am not only leaving my husband, but I am also announcing the launch of my own firm, Bedrock Engineering." The silence was finally broken. A collective audible gasp filled the ballroom. She had not only ended her marriage, she had declared war. She had taken his insult, the foundation, and turned it into her crown. The name hung in the air. Bedrock Engineering. It was more than just a clever name. It was a declaration of independence. It was the sound of a woman reclaiming her history, her talent, and her future in a single, perfectly chosen word. It was the name she and Leo had brainstormed on a placemat in a diner all those years ago for the firm they were supposed to build together. He had discarded it in favor of the more grandiose Vance developments. She had held on to it. The shock in the ballroom was palpable. They had expected a domestic drama, a messy divorce announcement. They had not expected a corporate coup. Clara had transformed a personal humiliation into a professional launching pad, and she had done it on her husband's stage, using his spotlight. Leo looked as if he had been physically struck. His face was a canvas of disbelief and dawning panic. She hadn't just left him, she had positioned herself as his direct competitor. More than that, she had subtly reminded the entire industry, everyone in this room who mattered, of her own credentials, the silent partnership that had been the secret to his success. The visionary had just been exposed as a man who couldn't even see the value of the woman standing beside him. Clara's voice, now imbued with a new, unshakable confidence, delivered the final, devastating blows. Bedrock Engineering will be dedicated to the principles of sound design, ethical practice, and unwavering integrity, she announced. We will build things that last, things you can trust, because a beautiful facade is worthless if the foundation is rotten. Every word was a perfectly aimed missile. She was no longer talking about buildings. Everyone in the room knew it. She had just authored the new narrative, and it was a story of her strength and his profound, irredeemable failure of character. She looked directly at Leo one last time. There was no hatred in her eyes, only a vast, empty space where her love for him used to be. "So thank you, Leo," she said, her voice cool and final. "Thank you for this award, and thank you for this clarity. You've given me a far greater gift than you could ever imagine." With that, she stepped away from the podium. She did not look back. She did not wait for a reaction. Her part in this play was over. She walked not toward the exit where the press was surely gathering, but toward her friend Mark's table. He was already on his feet, his own coat slung over his arm, his expression a mixture of awe and fierce loyalty. He wrapped a protective arm around her shoulders as she reached him. "Let's go home, Clara," he said softly. As they walked toward a side exit, the spell that had held the ballroom captive finally broke. A tidal wave of noise erupted. People shouting, chairs scraping, the frantic clicking of phone cameras capturing her departure. It was chaos. But Clara heard none of it. She walked through the storm with a serene, almost surreal sense of peace. She had walked into this ballroom as Leo Vance's wife, a beautiful pregnant accessory. She was leaving as Clara Thorne, CEO of Bedrock Engineering. They slipped out a service exit into the cool night air, bypassing the frenzy at the front. A valet, recognizing Mark, quickly brought his car around. As she slid into the passenger seat, Clara finally allowed herself to exhale. A single tear, hot and heavy, traced a path down her cheek. It was not a tear of sorrow. It was a tear of release. The gilded cage had burst open, and she was, for the first time in a very long time, free. Back in the ballroom, the scene was one of utter pandemonium. Leo stood frozen on the stage, the crystal award feeling impossibly heavy in his hand. Serafina was trying to talk to him, her face a mask of frantic damage control, but he couldn't hear her. He could only see the empty space at his table, the ghost of his wife's presence. He had orchestrated the entire evening as his coronation, the moment he would formally trade his old life for a new, more exciting one. He had envisioned himself as a king, boldly choosing his new queen. He had never imagined his old queen would simply pick up her crown, melt it down, and forge it into a sword. The applause he had received now felt like a distant, mocking echo. The adoring faces in the crowd had turned into a gallery of judgment. His investors, his clients, his rivals, they had all witnessed his profound lack of character. He had won an award for integrity on the same night he had proven to the world he had none. He had not just lost his wife, he had lost his foundation, and he was beginning to understand, with a terror that clawed at his throat, that without it, he was nothing but a pile of bricks about to come tumbling down. The next morning, the city awoke to the story. It wasn't just gossip, it was a headline. Visionaries' gala gambit backfires, screamed the front page of the Financial Times. The society pages were even less kind. The wife's revenge, a bedrock of strength. The image was everywhere. Leo and Serafina in their passionate, stage-lit kiss, a picture of reckless indulgence. But the stories weren't about them. They were about Clara. Overnight, she had become a symbol. Her calm, dignified speech was transcribed and quoted, her final words becoming a mantra for scorned women everywhere. A beautiful facade is worthless if the foundation is rotten. Social media lit up with the hashtag bedrock strength. She was lauded not as a victim, but as a strategist. A woman who had faced the ultimate public betrayal and responded not with tears, but with a business plan. The fallout for Leo was immediate and catastrophic. By 9 a.m., two of his primary investors had called for an emergency board meeting. The family-oriented charity he had been a patron of publicly severed ties, citing a fundamental misalignment of values. A major municipal contract that had been all but guaranteed was suddenly put under review. The narrative that Serafina had been so keen to reshape had been hijacked and rewritten by Clara. And in this new version, Leo was the villain. Serafina, the supposed victor, found her triumph had turned to ash. She had miscalculated spectacularly. She thought she was deposing a meek, compliant wife. She hadn't realized she was starting a war with a brilliant engineer who knew all the structural weaknesses in the empire Serafina wanted to rule. Instead of being seen as a powerful partner, she was painted as a ruthless homewrecker, a facade specialist who had helped a fool destroy his life. Her career in public relations was likely over. She had orchestrated the worst PR disaster of the decade. Meanwhile, in a quiet, sunlit apartment that Mark had lent her, Clara was taking the first steps of her new life. Her phone buzzed incessantly with calls from reporters, lawyers, and even potential investors. She ignored them all. Her first call was to her obstetrician to schedule a checkup. Her second was to a real estate agent to find a small office space. For the first few days, she allowed herself to grieve. Not for the man Leo had become, but for the man he had been. For the love they had lost long before that fateful night. She grieved for the family she thought she was building. She allowed the pain to wash over her, acknowledging it without letting it drown her. She cried for the past, but her eyes remained firmly on the future. A week later, she found it. A small, dusty office on the third floor of an old brick building with large windows overlooking a park. It was a world away from the sleek, glass and steel headquarters of Vance Developments. It was perfect. Armed with her laptop, her life savings, and a fierce, unshakable resolve, she began to work. She incorporated bedrock engineering. She designed a simple, elegant logo. She started calling old contacts, contractors and architects who had respected her work when she was the silent force behind Leo. The response was overwhelming. People had not forgotten her talent. They had seen what happened at the gala and were eager to align themselves with her brand of integrity. A small but prestigious contract to consult on a historic library renovation came through. It wasn't a skyscraper, but it was a start. It was hers. She worked with a quiet, relentless focus. The long hours were fueled not by ambition for wealth or fame, but by a deep, primal need to build something safe and stable for her child. The nursery in the penthouse was a distant memory. Now she sketched designs for a new one in a small two-bedroom apartment she planned to rent, a cozy, protected space built on a foundation of love and honesty. Her pregnancy became her metronome, the steady rhythm of the growing life inside her, marking the passage of time and the progress of her own rebirth. She was no longer just waiting for a baby. She was building a world for it to be born into. One rainy afternoon, 2 months after the gala, a package arrived at her office. There was no return address. Inside was a simple, leather-bound journal. The first page contained a single handwritten note. It was from Leo. Clara stared at the note, her heart giving a painful, involuntary lurch. It was his handwriting, the same bold architectural script that had once filled their lives with love notes and blueprints for their future. For a moment, she considered throwing it away, unopened. But curiosity, and perhaps a need for final closure, won out. Her hands trembled slightly as she read. Clara, There are no words to excuse what I did. Sorry is a pathetic, hollow word for the devastation I caused. I was a fool, intoxicated by the light and the noise, and I smashed the most beautiful thing in my life without a thought. I didn't just lose you, I lost myself. I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I'm not asking for it. I just wanted you to have this. It's the original journal from our first year, the one where we sketched out everything. The Arts Center, our first house, Bedrock. It belongs to you. It was always your vision more than mine. I heard about the library project. It's a beautiful design. You were always better with foundations than I was. Leo, what sure you was too. She slowly turned the pages of the journal. There it was, their shared past, captured in faded ink. Sketches, calculations, dreams. On one page, a detailed drawing of a cradle he had designed for their future child, with her engineering notes scribbled in the margins to make it stable. The note was not an apology designed to win her back. It was a confession, a concession, an acknowledgement of the truth she had declared on that stage. He finally understood. She closed the journal and placed it on her desk. It was not a painful reminder anymore. It was an artifact, a piece of a past she had survived and learned from. She felt a surprising sense of peace settle over her. She didn't need to forgive him, not for his sake. But in that moment, she let go of the last vestiges of her anger, for her own. He was no longer a monster in her story. He was just a man who had lost his way, a pile of bricks left behind as she continued to build. 6 months later, Clara stood in the newly completed nursery of her own apartment. The evening sun streamed through the window, casting a warm glow on the simple, elegant crib and the bookshelf filled with stories she couldn't wait to read. Bedrock Engineering was thriving. She had a small, dedicated team, and they were gaining a reputation for excellence and integrity. She was respected. She was fulfilled. She was happy. A sharp kick from within reminded her that she was not alone. She smiled, resting her hands on her belly. Soon, she whispered, almost time to meet you, little one. She looked out the window at the city skyline. Towers of glass and steel, many of which Leo had built, glittered in the setting sun. They no longer looked like monuments to her own erased contributions. They were just buildings, part of a landscape that she was now helping to shape on her own terms. She was no longer the foundation for someone else's dream. She was the architect of her own life, and she was building it on bedrock, solid, true, and unbreakable. Her past was a blueprint, her present was the work site, and her future, held safely within her, was the most magnificent structure of all. Clara faced an impossible choice in a moment of unimaginable pain. She could have crumbled, and the world would have understood. Instead, she chose to build. She reminds us that our deepest wounds can become the source of our greatest strength, and that true power isn't about the stage you're on, but the ground you stand on. And now we turn the question to you. Imagine yourself in that ballroom. The lights, the stairs, the ultimate betrayal unfolding before the world. What would you have done? Would you have walked away in silence? Would you have confronted him in a storm of righteous anger? Or would you, like Clara, have found a way to turn your deepest heartbreak into the foundation of a new life? Let us know in the comments below.